coming, everybody. Yeah, wasn't this great? We have Mitch Guzick on piano, Joey Thomas on drums. And we're going to be hearing more from them this evening as we continue. We'll have some nice interludes. And then because we are sort of celebrating together tonight, if you want to hang around after we tell some stories and the main program, feel free to hang out a little while, and they're going to continue to play some music. So if you like that, stay around for more music, all right? So yeah, thanks guys, that was awesome. So we're excited tonight because we get to kind of bring together a couple different communities that are connected with Dr. G, who's going to be our host tonight. We're bringing together the Black Like Me podcast community, so listeners. Is there any listeners in the house? Yeah. So we're especially celebrating because this year, Black Like Me was voted Best Local Podcast by Madison Magazine. Oh my God, right? Number one podcast? So hopefully, I bet you some of you supported in that win of being the supporters. And we're also celebrating 2.5 years of the Lean Into Allyship community, right? The sessions? Yeah, so as most of you know, Lean Into Allyship is sessions that were started mainly by Dan Beltran and Samantha Jefferson. And unfortunately, Dan can't be here tonight. He has moved to Milwaukee since they started that. But Samantha is here, and you're going to hear a little bit from her a little bit later. But they were integral in coming to Dr. G originally and kind of saying, you know, in 2020, all these sort of this racial unrest, these murders of innocent black men and women, and saying, you know, we want to learn more, we want to hear more from the black community, what we can do. So that kind of birthed Lean Into Allyship. And so I think probably many people here have benefited from those different sessions and hearing what they're doing. And I also want to recognize, I'm not sure if either of them are here tonight, but also Don Thornton and Ashley Keeler are also integral parts of Lean Into Allyship. Hopefully you'll be able to mention that to them when you see them as well. The theme of this evening is hope, and this is something that Dr. G was telling our team that he really wanted to talk about. This time of year, this space where we're at, to be able to look ahead. And we're also going to be sharing some comments from some people who are listeners of the podcast and those who have appreciated Lean Into Allyship tonight. So I want to start with a quote that I found really closely connected to what we're doing here tonight. So this is from a listener, Melody Harrison Hansen, and she said, "Black Like Me is a blessing to me. As I listen, I've grown in knowledge and empathy. I learn about Black experience from Dr. G's incredible guests. I feel the hurt of his experiences of racism in Madison. I've laughed with his joy-filled interviews and friendships. I'm grateful for Pastor G's honesty. He's found a great balance between the truth of and confrontation of racism and his powerful, strong, and successful Black contributors." So when I read that, it really kind of struck me that I hope that's sort of what we can sort of sum up this evening is like too. That we will be hearing some truth from some of the storytelling that's happening, some personal experiences, and we really value that. But we're not shying away from that sort of confrontation that we talked about, right? The whole point of Black Like Me podcast, and especially Lean Into Allyship, is to start conversations. So we hear from people that hopefully kind of spark something, and we continue those conversations, in our homes, right? When we listen, or when we chat with other people in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces. So that's the whole goal, is to keep those conversations going. So that's what we want to have happen tonight. Okay, I'm going to let Dr. G take over here so we can keep this going and hear some stories. But before I do that, there's something very important I think we need to take care of. So if you've listened to the Black Like Me podcast, you know of the Black Icebreakers, right? So I need to take a little informal poll right now and see whether we prefer grits or cream of wheat? Okay? And so, you have to be honest, because I'm gonna be real honest with you right now. I grew up on cream of wheat, and I don't know if I've told him this, but I still sort of prefer cream of wheat. I like grits. I do like grits, but it's that nostalgia of the cream of wheat, and I think that's where it comes from. So, listen, be honest, because you're not gonna get any points with Dr. G by saying grits. I mean, you probably will get points with him if you say it. That's probably true. But really, be honest. Okay, so raise your hand if you prefer cream of wheat. Or maybe you're used to cream of wheat. Okay, there's a few bold people here. Okay. Well, let me start. Next question. Who has never had grits? Anybody? A couple of people. Okay, so maybe you don't know. Okay. You folks are cut out. You can't vote. Okay, so let's see some hands for grits. Oh, wow. Okay. You see who your friends are, Dr. G.
My work here is done.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we could get into, the whole, what do you put on your grits? And that may cause some other divides, but we won't go there yet. So I'm going to bring up Dr. G. And he is, as if you didn't know, a husband, a dad, griot, social entrepreneur, pastor, author, innovator, podcast host, agitator of the status quo, reconciler, teacher, healer, and thought leader. So go ahead and come up, Dr. G, and we'll get started.
Hey, thank you so much. Eli, thank you. Wow. Cream of wheat. Racist. Hey, it's so good to be here tonight. It's wonderful to see you all. As we were thinking about how we pull off this beautiful evening of celebrating hope through music and through discussion and through storytelling, we weren't sure, well, could people make it out? Will they come out this time of year? And so just stepping into this place and seeing your faces and feeling the warmth of this crowd is just really wonderful. And I just think you ought to give yourselves a hand for being here. I created Black Like Me years ago because I wanted to have a place to share my stories. And I often tell stories. If you ever come to Fountain of Life on a Sunday, I'm full of stories, and I talk about, folks that are very dear to me, stories about my wife, my daughter, my mom, my grandmother. Inside Nehemiah's work, I don't tell as many stories because I'm really reporting on our programming. But in this life, particularly really living as a Black person, as a Black man in this community, there's so many experiences that I have that I couldn't preach about it because the language I would need to tell it would not work. I mean, I'd get fired or kicked out of my church. And I can't always say those things inside Nehemiah's circles. But having a podcast gives me a chance to talk about my experiences, to talk about what it feels like to have certain experiences. And that's what I think Melody was saying when we had a comment earlier about what it felt like to listen in on Black Speak and how these things work and how they feel. And so for me, the podcast has really been a place to not just only hear my voice, but to share my burden. For example, Eli say, oh, talk about it. In Black church tradition, we have like testimony service. You're like, hey, I got something on my heart. Talk about it, brother, talk about it. So my mom's in a nursing home because she has dementia. Had it for about 11 years. So we just found a new place for her. I don't have time to show this. I wish we had PowerPoint, but they brought her something to eat in the styrofoam box. No vegetables, no fruit, just the stuff that looked like vomit or diarrhea. So I wanted to meet about that. I came back the next day to make sure stuff was all right. My mother was wearing the same clothes that she was wearing the night before. Brought it up, took pictures. So I go into the meeting just to kind of talk. I mean, just because I wanted to make sure I wasn't mixing things up. When I went into the meeting, it was just all tense and terse and everything. Now, this is not necessarily, talking about racism, perhaps, because people were upset because I was in there taking pictures. If you know me, I take pictures of my mother all the time. I post pictures all the time. Hey, it's Valentine's Day, it's Christmas, my mom's birthday, I'm always doing it. But in the meeting, they called me aggressive because I was taking pictures of my mom attempting to eat Play-Doh. And so I realized, I felt the anger and the frustration, and I thought, I got a podcast. I've got somebody I have someplace I can take this burden to, because if folks are in here, particularly black men who are in this room, you know that when people start calling you aggressive, all kinds of stuff can start popping off. And that's not different for black women either, but when you start putting those kinds of labels on, that means you're a threat, it means you're dangerous. I'm gonna push the button. What's gonna happen? And so, listen, if I am gonna get in trouble, if I am gonna go to jail, I would be willing to do that over my mom. There's not a lot of things I will do that over, but I will do that for my mom, because I am who I am because of who she is. But then I got a call driving home that they're trying to dismiss her from the nursing home because I asked, and find me later. I'll show you the picture of the stuff. I'll show you the picture of her wearing the same things. I created the podcast because I needed to say something so that others listening are saying, me too. Defending your parent, that's not a black thing. Speaking up for a living, that's not a black thing. But marginalizing you by calling you aggressive, that's where race starts coming, because that's when somebody pushes the panic button. That's when people start calling the police, and that's where all kinds of stuff start going down. And sometimes I think this community is not where those things happen. One of the guys who was a maintenance manager said, I was in police for 14 years, and I know how to detect aggression. He was very aggressive. They said, well, did he threaten you? He said, no. Did he threaten the facility? No. Did he threaten any staff? They said, no. What did he say? He said, well, I need some answers, because either I'm going to get this taken care of internally, or I'm going to take it to social media. But anyway, either way, somebody's going to help me to know why my mother's wearing the same clothes. That's the aggressiveness that they were concerned about, that they want to put out an 83-year-old black woman who's got dementia because her son is defending her. Now, if that ain't intact black families, I don't know what is. That's how I was raised, to take care of families. So for me, the podcast gives me a chance to say things unashamedly, undeniably, unapologetically, because this stuff happens, and it happens all the time. And being able to have a place to talk about that and to voice it is important. And so listeners tune in from every state in the union. At one point, we didn't have all 50 states. We started calling out states. What's up from Vermont? What's your problem, South Dakota? And then they started coming in. People started calling their family and their relatives. And then we have people from multiple nations around the world. We've had nearly 350,000 unique downloads of a podcast episode from all around the world. And I am so excited. And before I go any further, I would just like Jeremy Holiday, who is my engineer, Eli, who was my producer, and Tyler Nyland, who's no longer part of the team, but he helped us start it. I mean, I couldn't deal with 3 white men, and so somebody had to go. But could you gentlemen just please stand? These are the folks who stood with me to really help me lift this off the ground. And listen to me vent and laugh and leaned in and cried or fussed or even said, okay, where do we roll up to beat up somebody at your mama's place? And so I just love the fact that in this community we've been able to create this. And so tonight we're celebrating this kind of space, and I really think you're going to be encouraged. We talk about good things and exciting things as well, but that's the side of black life that we have to do. And then I have to still raise tens of millions of dollars and lead organizations and show up and smile and meet the governor and the mayor and the senators, which is all part of the work. But behind us, all of these things are going on, and I'm not unique. Any person of color in here knows what I'm talking about. And this is what makes us so strong. But what's part of my superpower is that I get to say it and shake it off and sort of leave it there. And for the people who don't have places to dump these kinds of stories, they get sick. And I'm not gonna get sick behind this. And so I so appreciate this space, and actually this space as well. And so we're gonna have people telling stories tonight about how they've been impacted by the work, how they think differently about it, how they think differently about themselves, and you're really going to enjoy this. And so the first person that I'm inviting up is someone who I just introduced. His name is Jeremy Holiday. Jeremy is gifted in so many ways in terms of communications and media expressions. He's got a huge heart and a huge brain, very thoughtful, and challenges me to think about the podcast and its next steps. And not only is he my engineer, but he's become a very trusted friend and an ally. And so, Jeremy, I want to invite you up to come and tell us a little story about the podcast.
Tonight I'm going to tell you a story. The story that I'm going to tell you involves a bunch of different people. If any of those people were up here instead of me, they might tell you a different story than the one that I'm going to tell you. This is a roundabout way of saying there's a lot of ways you can tell this story, but this one's mine. And it's real talk. The story that I'm going to tell you consists of a few important moments that are part of a much larger story. The first of those moments begins in my basement. There's a carpeted room in my basement, which is my office. I call it my office because that's where my computer is. I am in there, pacing back and forth. I have my phone in my hand, and I'm rehearsing over and over again in my head what I'm going to say, thinking about what's going to happen when I pick up that phone. I had talked to Dr. G earlier in the week. I had said, Dr. G, I'm kind of dealing with a thing, nothing to do with the podcast. Can I talk to you? He's always generous with your time, so he said yes. And from that moment to the moment that I picked up the phone, I was trying to figure out exactly how I was going to present myself. When the time came, I picked up the phone, we explained, got through the pleasantries, and I laid out the situation. As he knew, I was the president of an organization. It's called Madison United Rugby. It's a sports organization, nonprofit, that manages all the rugby in Madison from youth all the way up to adult league play. We have a wonderful facility in Cottage Grove. And I had gotten an email as the president of that organization from a colleague of mine that had traveled up to Madison with a team from Chicago. And as she was riding back, she was riding with one of the newest members of the team, a young 19-year-old black kid who was freaking out. Because at the game they just played, somebody on the Madison team called him the N-word in the middle of the game. Now, I had the president of the organization, all the governing is through board, so I reached out to board members, alumni, donors, all the community. And one of the things my friend who sent me the email said is, I'm emailing you, Jeremy, because you developed a reputation as somebody that gives a shit and somebody that tries their best to get stuff done. So I had conversation after conversation after conversation about what to do, and what I encountered almost everywhere was some version of this, which was someone saying, oh man, this is terrible. We can't be doing this thing. And they wring their hands or some sort of thing, and then they do nothing. And whenever I would suggest a step forward, I would be met with all kinds of excuses. There were two important details that I needed to add. One of which was, I was not able to find any corroborating evidence to this fact, right? It wasn't caught on film. No one else on the other team heard it. No one on the Chicago team heard it. So plenty of people I talked to said, well, it's terrible and unfortunate, but there's nothing we can do, right? All of a sudden, we are like the Supreme Court of the United States. We cannot do anything unless we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And the second thing, which is one of the reasons I was calling Dr. G, was the person that was accused of saying it was also a person of color. Someone I'd actually known for a number of years, had an African-American parent and a white parent. And for this, God bless him, all the white people around me treated it as if it were like out of our jurisdiction. It's like, well, a black person said the N-word to another black person, so literally there's nothing we can do. There's no possible way we can be a part of that. And I had never really dealt with this before, but I just kept thinking, like, I don't really care who said it, right? We have a 19-year-old kid who got called this word on the field and is freaking out. Our responsibility is for that kid. And I don't know all about stuff, but like that knife cuts, I think, no matter who wields it, right? He obviously was hurt by it. The other thing which was said, and I just have to say it, is like there were folks that were like, okay, so like he's a black kid from Chicago and a black kid from Madison, so like maybe like the guy from Madison was like trying to like greet him, but like it got received wrong. And I was like, literally, like you won't touch this issue, but you're telling me like someone attempted like a soft R use and it landed as like a hard R use. Like I don't think this is what happened here, right? I didn't like this kid isn't freaking out, and I did not get an email from a friend of mine because like there was like an awkward greeting, like they didn't pat each other and do the right fist bump. Like that's not what we're talking about. Because ultimately what was happening was people were finding any possible excuse to do nothing. And this is why I called Dr. G. And I called him and I said, Dr. G, I said, I don't know what to do. I have no idea how to proceed. And he's a great man. And when he picked up the phone, he was happy to listen to me. But by this point in the conversation, he was different. And I think I can honestly describe his attitude towards me as something that was between disappointment and disgust. Because he said, like he said earlier, just right here, he's like, Jeremy, you got a fine head, you fine brain in your head, got a fine heart in that chest, you got a bunch of degrees, you're a grown-ass man, we've been doing this podcast for 3 years, we've had at least 3 episodes about the N-word, 2 of which had to do with institutions, 1 of which had to do with someone using it in the space we're in. How can you possibly have no idea what to do? And I think that is one of the most profound questions in all of this stuff about race that I've ever been asked. And I will continue to struggle with that question the rest of my life. And I think, as I've thought about it, that I have an answer, and it's a weird answer, but I'll tell it to you. Because there's a little bit of humor, but it's also interesting and insightful, I think. Because I think at the heart of that why couldn't I do something, was because I believed in this thing that I think that was part of the white, progressive, liberal worldview that I got in the late 90s and I got in the early 2000s, which was that fundamentally white people cannot understand the black experience. And I think this comes about, I imagine a scene. Many of you have maybe seen this. It's 1995. There's a black man. There's a white man. The black man's like, man, it is rough being a black man in America. And the white guy is like, yes, my brother, I totally get what you were talking about. I know what it is like to be a racial minority. One time, I took a trip to Japan. I was the only white guy in that village. It was very awkward, strange feeling inside. I totally know what it's like. And the black guy's like, y'all don't get it, right? And in this day and age, we have more language to talk about white supremacy. In the 90s, we didn't. Someone says white supremacy, someone's like, I'm not a Nazi, and that's the end of it, right? And I think at the heart, this idea, this inability to understand is about protecting and respecting the black experience, and about telling white people that you are so shrouded in your own privilege that you can't see it. But I think when I looked at the situation around me, and even inside of myself, I saw that this idea that a white person can't understand a black person was being used as a justification to not even try, to never even attempt to understand what it might like to be different. And I saw it around me creating this sense of a weaponized paralysis of white people saying, well, I can't possibly do something because the N-word is involved, because 2 black people are involved, because I don't know how to do any of this. And the reality is they're ultimately saying that they didn't want to. And I thought as I redeveloped a relationship with this, that I realized that I was using it to justify my own inaction and paralysis. And I went on to talk to Dr. G about some more details about it. And I said this. I talked to the coach in Chicago. I didn't know the young guy, so I said, hey, could you please, apologize for me? And I think, Dr. G was very jovial to me tonight, but I think that was about it for him in this conversation, because he had said, Jeremy, look, you're the president of your organization. I guarantee you that kid knows in excruciating detail the last 5 times, if not every time, someone has called him that word. You don't ask someone to apologize. You don't send him an email. You get your ass to Chicago, or you get him on the phone and you apologize yourself. We talked about a few other things. We ended the phone conversation. I am back in my room, pacing back and forth. I realize among the things that I need to do, that there's one of them. And as I sat thinking about this list, and I don't know if Dr. G used these words, but it's what I wrote in my notes. I said that he has this list burned in him. These points, these moments burned in him. And as I sat there thinking, I realized that I have a list inside me as well, right? There are moments in my life that burn and will burn for always. The first of which, I am 15 years old, my father is dead, I am an orphan, my uncle is drunk, in my face, telling me what a useless, worthless piece of shit I am, how happy he is that my father is dead so he doesn't have to listen to his inane prattle all day long. I've been to enough therapy to know that that is about him, and it's not the truth, and it's not about me. I have also been to therapy long enough to know that that moment will burn in me forever. And I thought, if there is any overlap between my list of stuff and this kid's list of stuff, then I had a reference about how to proceed, about what I might say to him. about how I would move forward. I got information from the Chicago coach. 3 days later, I'm pacing in my basement again. I give him a call. First time, rings all the way through. Second time, I'm calling this young man, it rings all the way through. I'm not a millennial, but I think I know what it means. He's not taking the phone call. Totally fine with me. It's like he's not choosing to take the phone call of a 42-year-old white guy who's apologizing on behalf of a 20-year-old younger guy on a team that he just played, right? Third time rings through, I'll leave him a message. I don't remember all the stuff that I said. I told him who I was, that I cared about what was going on, and that I was sorry. I said that it was bullshit. I said nobody deserves it, not anywhere in the world, not on our field. And if we care about our sport, our field should be a place that's even better than other places, right? This should be especially a place where he doesn't have to deal with this shit. Hung up, sent him a text to the same effect. Got a call from the coach the next day, said that he got my message, said that he appreciated it. Coach said that he had dealt with this stuff before, and he was really impressed at how seriously I took it. And I felt a little bit good about doing something. It's important for you. So at this point in the story, there are probably a lot of questions that you still have. What happened to the guy in the Madison team? What happened to the Madison team itself? What happened to the Chicago team? What happened to all this stuff? I said at the beginning I'm telling a story about a few moments in a larger picture. Even just telling what happened over the months that come would take the rest of the evening. The thing I wanted to close with is this. It's cool. Like the story I want to tell as an ally is like, I had a moment of crisis. I went to Dr. G, and he sent me on my way, you know? The reality is, in the rest of this particular saga, I went into meetings with friends and left with none. I went into phone conversations with allies and left with enemies. I went into places with order, and I left them with chaos. I bumbled my way through the rest of it, because ultimately, what happened with Dr. G was not an end, was not a culmination of me doing this work. It was a beginning. It was a beginning of me taking responsibility for my own ignorance, about me taking responsibility for my own inaction and all the inaction of the people around me. And though I can't say that I did great stuff past that, I can say, which is true, that I did one thing a lot less. And that thing was seeing something terrible, saying it's bad, wringing my hands, and doing nothing.
Ooh, right. Did I mention that Jeremy has won the Moth Storytelling Night? You might notice why. All right. So that's just the start. We're just getting started. So I'm going to share some comments from listeners and folks involved in some of these communities in the podcast, and we're going to hear from someone special in just a moment. Lauren, who helps out with Into Allship as well. So she's just going to come up quick and just say a couple of words. So the first comment I want to read is from Amy Thronson, who unfortunately really wanted to be here but couldn't be here tonight. So she says, Dr. G, I'd like to thank you and your guests for your willingness to come into a space and share your experiences with each other in your interviews and in your relationships, but then also to publish those conversations with a broader audience so we can listen. I know for me, I've been used to talking a lot, and been able to be in a space where I am the listener has been a critical part to my ability to stop talking and to stop centering myself, to stop centering my experiences, and to be in a space where I can only listen. So I just want to thank you and your guests for sharing your podcast. And I am purposefully not calling it a safe place, because I don't know if your podcast is safe for you and all of your guests. And I do not want to make that assumption. And I think by listening to your podcast, I can say that I don't know if it's a safe place for you, and some of your podcast episodes share how it is not safe. And I appreciate your willingness to also share the joy with your guests, and also the challenges that you face day in and day out that I will never know anything about unless you are willing to share. So I really like that quote because talking about safe space, I think that we could talk a whole lot about that. But I know firsthand, before the pandemic, we used to record the podcast in a radio studio. And so I was in a different room running some of the sound stuff. And so, but sometimes Dr. G would spontaneously sort of like pull me into the show or ask me questions. And so that felt very vulnerable, right? I remember when Jeremy or Tyler, you hear from Tyler Nyland in a little bit to share a story, but when he would sort of pull us on, one of the first things he would often ask us and say, so, are you white? Would you say you're white? And so I was always a little like unsure how to answer that. So mostly I would say yes, in a way that I meant like in my head, like I am accepting all of my privilege and the history of whiteness and what that, entails. I'm gonna claim that, right? Like, yep, white people have done some great atrocities in history, and I'm just gonna say, yeah, that's part of who I am, right? And then one time he asked Tyler, after I think Tyler had said, yeah, I'm white a few times, this happened, and he said something to the effect of, I'm European American or something like that. And Dr. G said, yes, you're getting it, Tyler. And so it was about recognizing his own culture and heritage also, and that's part of what we were learning, right? So Dr. G, maybe you can tell me if there's a right or wrong answer to that, but I think you were trying to push us to think about what that means, about who we are as people, what our history informs about us, our families, our heritage. So it's not always a safe place. I don't know, but it's a good place.
Eli, can I say
Yeah.
something for a second?
Please.
I'm interrupting, I'm sorry. I wanted my team to know that white is a sociological construct, that your grandparents and your great-grandparents didn't come from white Europe. They came from Czechoslovakia, they came from Germany, they came from France, and I wanted them to embrace that cultural celebration, because unless they did, they couldn't understand why I needed to. And I wanted them to know that they're not just the descendants of atrocious history, but they come from a culture with food and religion and faith and songs and traditions. And if they couldn't lean into that, they would never understand why culture is so important to black people. So I wasn't trying to trap them by saying, go ahead, say it, you're white, you know it, you're guilty, say it. I wanted them to understand that assigning whiteness whitewashed people of European descent to not identify with their true heritage, so they could all wear the same jerseys and have the privileges that people of color didn't have. And I wanted to push them to just look back a little further to understand the origin of their names and those things, because culture is important to everybody and not just people of color. That's what I was really trying to push them to understand.
He was trying to trap us. Okay, so this is from Andrew Dearlove. I've been listening to the Black Like Me podcast for several years, and they have as much impact on me as they did in 2018. It is a rare and instructive opportunity to hear conversations among black friends, professionals, family, that both reiterates what we all have in common and provides a stark depiction of what black people experience in this country that I never will, and no one should. While each episode is captivating, eye-opening, and sometimes very difficult to listen to, they are also full of joy and humor. And at the end of the day, I just don't understand why anyone has to choose between grits and cream of wheat. Can we just have both? The answer is no. It's not. Okay, I'm gonna bring up Lauren Escher if she's ready, and she has been integral part of the Lean Into Allyship sessions coming from Generator. So she's just gonna share real quick about what that's meant.
My nervous reaction is dry mouth, so that's why I brought the water up. I'm Lauren Usher. As Eli said, I work at Generator, which is a startup accelerator and venture firm here in Madison. We work across the country as well. And I started working with Nehemiah and with Justified Anger mainly back in 2020 when, as we talked about, the Lean Into Allyship series came into being. And part of that was through Generator to help with the back end kind of Zoom work on that series. And since then, we have done an accelerator together. We have continued to work on the Lean Into Allyship series and done various other collaborations. So just kind of setting the stage of what my involvement has looked like. I've also taken the Black History for a New Day course twice, which if anybody in here has not yet taken it, highly recommend. Everyone gives that a 10 out of 10. So my husband right here, Ben Tiemeyer, we are from Miami and we moved to Madison about 6 years ago. And he took the Black History for a New Day course first. And the way that his mind works is that the moment that he hears content, it's cemented in his brain. So he has absorbed everything from that course series, and he would come home from the class. It was in person when he took it. And he would come home from the class and tell me all about it. And just kind of, digest everything that he was learning and try to help me learn it too. And I was like, okay, I need to take this thing. I need to absorb. It takes me a few more times to absorb. And as I mentioned, we're from Miami, so one of the things that I realized that is important to my experience is that my heritage is Central American, so Belizean and Mexican, and also English. And why that plays in is because I realized that being from Miami, I was part of the majority there. Miami is a majority Hispanic or Latino city. And then I moved to Madison, and I'm also white presenting. So when I moved from the place where I was part of the majority to Madison, I blend in with the majority here too. And so what that really enabled me to do in both places that I've lived is to be complacent, because I didn't really need to address any of the bias or microaggressions or anything that most people of color deal with, even people who are in my own family and look different from me, which has always been an interesting experience. And so when I was hearing from my husband about the class and decided to take that jump and go ahead and take the course, what it really did was, first of all, fill in all the gaps in history that I did not get from my regular schooling, unfortunately. But also it helped me to be equipped for the conversations, the discussions, and honestly the arguments sometimes that came up, amongst our friends and family and people that we knew, where before we did not feel empowered to respond. So we sometimes were complacent in that we sat back, we were quiet, or we would talk about it on the drive home and say, oh my gosh, what should we have said? What should we have done? What the class did was really give us the knowledge to say, actually, you're wrong. That is not true, what you just said. Or why did you say that? You must not have learned about, fill in the blank topic that we were able to glean from the topics covered. And so it really made me feel just better navigating the world, that I had a bit more, not that I know everything because it is a journey, but I feel a bit more equipped to move throughout the world, and really anywhere, but particularly in Madison, where, as we know, it's not the most diverse city in the world, and so it allows us to take the knowledge that we've gleaned and move throughout the world in a more educated space. So I'm very grateful for that. I would like to express gratitude to the whole team that puts together events like this and the podcast and the class, because it really has been life-changing. And I think the last piece that I'll mention is that as a company, we took the class as well, and it really helped us in, we work in venture capital, so it's like very not diverse. The majority of venture capital goes to white male founders year after year. It's actually on a decline, if you can imagine that, for the amount of funding that goes to Black men, women in general, and then women of color and Black women get the least, which is, it's like a less than 1% amount, or less than 0.1%. And so what the class has allowed me to do in my professional life as well is to take the knowledge that, the knowledge of the historical context that has brought us here and brought us to the current situation, and use that as we do the work that we do. As we, provide funding for founders and support founders who are building businesses, we can take that contextual knowledge, which is so important to the situation, and try our hardest to make a small change. So again, I would recommend it to anybody just on an individual level. If you maybe feel like you do have the ability to talk to someone at your workplace in order to get access to that class at a bigger level, think about what kind of a change that can make when you can speak about these topics in a professional space where often you're not even allowed to talk about these things. But when you've had a class like this, first of all, it tells you a little bit about the perspective of your workplace, if they allow that or not. But being able to talk about these things with your coworkers and your colleagues, and to understand how much all of this history impacts all of us day to day, whether we think it does or not, has been really impactful. So thanks for letting me share my story, and look forward to hearing from other people tonight too.
Come on, can we give it up for these great musicians again? Mitch and Joe? Great job. Man, I'm enjoying these stories. They are so heartfelt and so honest. Hey, coming up next to tell us a story is Joel Bolivian. Joel is an incredible young man. He moved to Madison to go to school, is working on his PhD. And I'm going to interview him a little bit later and ask him questions so you get to know more about him. But avid listener to the podcast, a former guest on the podcast, and so please, let's just give a warm welcome to Joel.
So, I'm a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin, where I study philosophy. And I have some aspirations, some ambitions. I hope to become a professor one day in the academy. And here's one thing I have going for myself with respect to that dream. I am very absent-minded. So it will be very easy for me to fill in that trope of the absent-minded professor. For example, this often happens when I'm in the shower and I'm about to wash my hair, and I forget whether I've already washed my hair because I'm engrossed in a thought. I'm thinking about an argument. I'm thinking about my dissertation. On good days, this means that I wash my hair twice, and so if you ever see me with really awesome looking hair, that was a day where I forgot that I had already washed it, and I washed it again. If you ever see me on a greasy day, that's because I completely forgot that I had never washed my hair while I was in the shower and just left the shower without washing my hair. This also happens, this absent-mindedness comes up when I'm driving. I make a lot of trips from Madison to Sand Lake, Michigan, where my family lives. It's about a 5.5-hour drive. And I've made that trip dozens of times. I've been in Madison for 6 years in my PhD program, so I travel back and forth from Michigan to Madison so many times throughout the year. And probably every other time I miss an exit, and I have to turn around, or I have to take a detour, or I'll forget whether I've taken an exit, and so I have to get back on my GPS and figure things out. And again, it's because I'm so engrossed in a certain thought or a certain idea. This happened once when I was driving my family to Texas many, many years ago. We were taking a family road trip to visit family in Texas, and my parents made the decision to trust me, put me in the driver's seat while they slept in the back. It was me and my little sister. We're driving to Texas, absent-minded professor at the wheel. A few hours later, I'm chatting with my little sister. We're having a great time. And then we ask ourselves, where are we? My parents wake up and they ask all of us, where are we? And it became very clear very quickly. We had taken a wrong turn. We had missed our turn. And again, it was just because my sister and I were so engrossed in thought, we completely missed things. And that trip turned out to be really fun, really interesting. But it's sort of a metaphor for my own journey. Thinking about social justice issues, thinking about race. It's a journey that's clumsy, a journey that involves turnarounds, missed exits, and so on. Our family has been on a lot of road trips, but we don't do everything together. And one thing that we've decided we can't really do together is we can't talk about politics together. Maybe some of you can relate with that. So around 2016, we started to have more conversations about politics, about social issues. And over the course of 4 years, it became clear that that was not a healthy thing for our family. In general, we're not a very confrontational family. We're sort of a good Midwestern etiquette family where you're kind of passive-aggressive when you want to make your point, but otherwise you avoid confrontation. But we started having a lot of challenging, tense, heated conversations about politics and social issues. People I loved, who I trusted, thought differently than me about some really important things. I remember when my dad came up to me and said, "Son," he's sort of the reconciler in the family, and he said, "Son, I think you and these other loved ones, you just should not talk about politics. I think it would be best if we didn't." And I agreed. It seemed like it wasn't fruitful, and so we avoided the issue. We didn't talk about race issues. We didn't talk about social justice issues. We didn't talk about politics. It wasn't fruitful, so we avoided the conversation, but something about that didn't feel right. Something about that felt painful. And I wondered, is there any hope? Is there any hope for us to have more fruitful conversations about these things, to actually make progress, to see some positive change? I think that two things started to give me hope as I reflected on my own family's challenging relationship with race issues and social justice issues. Two things gave me hope. First, I started showing up to some of the justified anger events. I started showing up to White and Wandering, Lean Into Allyship. I took the Black History course, and the content was really wonderful, but here's something that really astonished me, the demographics. The demographics of these events really astonished me. In particular, the age demographics. My students are Gen Zers. Gen Zers are wonderful. I like them a lot. One thing that Gen Zers have going for them is that they really know how to use social media. Millennials are right behind them on that. The problem is that a lot of my students think that because they're comfortable with the conversation on social media, they're committed to the cause outside of their phones. They can scroll and like a post about racial justice, but are they affiliating as part of the educate, donate, affiliate paradigm? They're very comfortable with social justice right here at the tip of their fingers, but social justice up close, in person, ongoing, sustained is a different thing. And all of us have been on that journey of learning how to have sustainable commitments to the cause rather than just being comfortable with the conversation. I'll never forget when one of my students in an ethics class I was teaching in the fall of 2020 said something like, "Our generation is going to be the generation to end racial justice." There's a lot of optimism there. I hope that's true. The problem is, I never saw any of my students showing up to justified anger events. When I showed up to these events, the people on the screen, a lot of Zoom calls, they had the same color skin as me, but they weren't the same age. I was astonished to see that it wasn't primarily Gen Zers or millennials who were showing up. It was Gen Xers and baby boomers and up. And something about that was so nourishing to my heart. It overturned a narrative we have in our culture that social justice belongs to the youth. And I think what this organization has shown me is that that's not true. And so I was nurtured by the wisdom, the experiences of people who were my parents' age on the other side of this screen. People who had been on this journey of allyship. And I was benefiting from their wisdom, and I was encouraged by their convictions. And here's something that gave me hope about my own family, is I could see my parents on those screens. The people that I was listening to, whose journey I was learning from, they were the same age as my parents, some of them. And I thought, this gives me a vision of what things could be like for my parents. Maybe there's hope that my parents could be brought into this community, that my parents could be at home on this journey. The other thing that gave me hope as I thought about my parents and my family's strained relationship with social justice issues was my own journey. My own very clumsy journey. For most of my life, I've been really apathetic about racial justice issues. I've been very apathetic about social justice at large. I've been negligent, thoughtless, oblivious even. When I started doing philosophy, I was very interested in questions about God's existence. I thought that was a really vexed, important issue, and I really wanted to understand that issue. And then I started thinking about epistemology and philosophy of science. That's what animated me and got me into philosophy. So when I came to the University of Wisconsin 6 years ago to start my PhD program, I wasn't thinking about social justice. My journey was very, very, very thin in its very beginning stages. And to just give you an example of how clumsy and awkward it has been, maybe you can relate. Here's an example. I showed up in my philosophy department in the student lounge, the grad student lounge, and some of my colleagues were talking about gender issues and feminism. And the specific topic was about the use of guys. Sometimes we say, hey guys, or do you guys want to go out? How do you guys feel about this? It's a gendered term, and one of my colleagues was suggesting that we needed to replace guys with something more neutral because guys was exclusive. A lot of times the people we're addressing aren't all men. Some might be women, some might be gender non-conforming or gender queer. And my contribution to this conversation, please embrace the cringiness of this, was, well, I don't think when people say, hey you guys, they intend any harm. And that was my contribution. The classic trope of avoiding, ignoring, overlooking the impact by focusing on intention. Fast forward a few years later, it's the summer of 2020, lots of things are happening. We're seeing a lot of awful things on television, hearing about a lot of awful things regarding race issues. And I'm talking with a black friend of mine who says, I just feel like what we're witnessing is modern day lynching. And without even thinking about it, I put on my philosopher's hat. Rather than seeing the pain of the person in front of me, I think about the issue as a theoretical issue. And I say, well, what's the definition of lynching? Is it really lynching? If I had to define lynching, I would say, I completely missed the context. My journey has frequently been clumsy, oblivious, apathetic, and harmful. And yet in the midst of that, God, the universe, whatever you think produces social change, has been gracious to me and brought me into something new, something transformative. I look back on who I was, and it's not who I am, and I have a long way to go, but I'm very grateful for that journey. And if I can go on a journey like that, I thought, then maybe my own parents, my own loved ones can go on that journey too. That has given me hope. Unfortunately, my mom's own journey and opportunity to go on that journey ended shortly. She was battling cancer this past year. On November 1st, she passed away. One of the most beautiful things that happened, though, leading up to this was on MLK Day, January 16th, this past year. Leading up to MLK Day, I thought to myself, we're not a family that engages politics anymore. We've decided we're not going to talk about it. But what can we do? What can we do to have some sort of conversation about racial justice? And it doesn't have to be about me. I need to decenter myself. And I thought, why don't I invite my parents to read Letter from Birmingham Jail? Why don't I invite my parents to read MLK? And so I said, would you all be willing to have that conversation leading up to MLK Day? They said, absolutely. So my dad read Letter from Birmingham Jail. My mom read Why We Can't Wait, about the Birmingham campaign. On MLK Day, we watched a documentary about MLK's life, about his work, his progress, and his legacy. At the end of this documentary, all of us as a family were in the living room confessing, repenting, and talking about our family's legacy with racism, exploring the ways in which we as a family had neglected this all-important issue. I wish my mom could have gone on a further journey. I wish she could have taken the Black History course. Those are all dreams that I had, but I'm encouraged by the fact that her journey, though not looking like my journey, was a journey nonetheless. And I cherish the lines, the underlined statements in this book that my mom made, lines that express where her journey was taking her. So, our journeys won't always look the same. And if you're like me, you might miss a lot of exits. You might get turned around. You might even get lost and have to start over at certain points. My hope for all of us, though, is that we stay on the journey. Thank you.
Joel, that was anything but absent-minded. That was very thoughtful, thought-provoking. Thank you for that. Next storyteller is going to be Tyler Nyland. I had him stand a little earlier because he was part of my founding team of the podcast. He's one of my colleagues. He's a pastor at Found a Life Church. He's also a Nehemiah employee. He's been involved in a number of social justice issues in this community. I consider him a friend, but also a trusted ally. And so he's going to come and talk to us a little bit about story from his perspective. And then I'm going to come back after that and ask both Tyler and Joel a few questions. So Tyler and Nyland, please come on up and take the floor.
Eli, we rolling? Cool. All right. Hey, everybody. This is Tyler, podcast man. Dang it. Sorry. Eli, can you cut that one? Can we
We're live.
We're live? We're live? Okay. Hey, everybody. This is Tyler. Sorry, Eli. Can we cut this? Can we? Okay, it's still rolling? It's still rolling, okay. Hey everybody, this is Patreon. My name is not Patreon. When I was a podcast manager for Black Like Me, I had a lot of wonderful responsibilities. Recording the Patreon ads was not one that I thought was going to be a very significant part of my job. Pastor G had asked me when I first started working for Nehemiah as an organization, he'd said, hey, Tyler, I would like to do something where I get to share my own voice, my own thoughts, outside of this pastoral role, outside of the CEO role. I want to be able to share from my heart a place. And I said, I'm a millennial. We can make this happen. We've got podcasts that we can do. We can find the right people. We can make this work. And so from that journey, we started on making podcasts together. I was able to be the podcast manager. I had so many responsibilities that were good, and I would do scheduling of guests, and I'd be able to talk to some of these amazing, amazing people. I got to talk to Kyle Korver, an NBA player, someone who I'd grown up watching as a Chicago Bulls fan, hit threes over and over and over. They called him Hot Sauce, and I got to talk to him. Not only did I get to talk to him, I got to go to a training with him where I was sitting at the same table talking to him like we were friends while other people came up and asked for autographs. I got to do amazing things. There were so many cool things. Pastor and I got to process so much about things going on. I got to have an insight, a deeper insight into the world of what was going on. But Patreon ads were not something that I thought meant much. Now, don't get me wrong. Patreon is a big deal for Black Like Me. If you want, you can actually go to patreon.com right now and fill out a Black Like Me Patreon. You can become a patron, you can support. And that was cool, but I thought recording the actual ad, does it really matter? Like, we could probably get a robot to do that, right? Like, it's just communicating information. We're gonna drop it in, we're gonna keep it going. And so this Patreon ad, I remember the day that I sat with Eli recording these Patreon ads. And for some reason I was nervous. I was doing exactly what I just did at the beginning, where I'd have these words. Eli, can we start over again? Oh, I'm so sorry, I messed this up. I didn't know why I was so nervous. But it was just something interesting that I noticed, was that the last thing that I thought was gonna be important in the podcast was how I recorded those Patreon ads. Little did I know that those Patreon ads would end up becoming one of the most significant pieces of my life. As part of this journey, being part of the podcast team, I ended up meeting someone who is soon to become my wife. I ended up having a love story that resulted from this. This all started because in May of 2020, someone started listening to the Black Like Me podcast. So for this part of the story, I need someone else to come up here and help share this story of how we met.
Hi, my name's Haley. I'm a Black Like Me podcast listener. I started listening in May 2020. As a lot have alluded to this evening, a lot was going on. A lot of folks started listening to the podcast around that time. And I'll be honest, when I started listening, I didn't really expect anything. I didn't expect it to, I think I expected it to change my life, but not to the extent that it ended up changing. I just wanted to learn more. I wanted to educate myself. And Dr. G and his guests and his team obviously do a wonderful job at setting the table for those conversations. So I felt like when I was listening to the podcast, I had a seat at that table. So it was May 2020, and I was listening to the podcast. I usually skipped the ads, but it was episode 100, and Shamika, I think her name was Shamika Pritchett, was the guest that day, and I decided to not skip the ad, and the voice I heard say the ad said,
Hey everybody, this is Tyler, podcast manager of Black Like Me. You're listening to Black Like Me today. I just wanted to tell you about two things real quick. Number one, Patreon.
and when I heard that voice, I said, oh dang, who is that? So I did the next logical step, and this is embarrassing, and I know it's embarrassing, but I Googled Tyler, Black Like Me, because that's all the information that I had. All I knew was that he sounded cute. So I Googled Tyler Black Like Me, easily found his last name on the internet, which led me to his Instagram account, saw his Instagram pictures, and I was like, oh, he's cute too. So I clicked follow. Did I hope for anything to come out of it? Not really. I just followed a person on Instagram, didn't really expect anything.
From this point of the story, all I know is that a cute girl who's in Madison followed me on Instagram. This is every millennial's dream when this doesn't happen. So we think, okay, what do I do to make this work? How do I make this work for me? I don't know anything else. I don't know how she found me, but I just know this is a cute girl who I don't know who followed me. So I say to myself, how do I create an opportunity for us to reach out, for us to get to know each other when I don't know her, she doesn't know me? Well, I want to be respectful because I don't want to just slide into her DMs and be like, hey girl, you followed me, like, that's weird, that's not okay, like, no, we're not going to do that. But she initiated, so let me create an opportunity. So that night, she posted an Instagram story. She posted an Instagram story of her French press coffee maker, which some of you may be familiar, very good coffee maker, but one of the flaws is that it is easy for a French press coffee maker to shatter. So she posted a picture of her French press shattered on the floor and said something like, oops. And I said, this is my moment. Now, if you know anything about me, you know that I am a coffee just snob to the top. And so I said, ooh, she likes coffee? Huh, she's in the market for a new coffee maker. Let me see what I can do here. So the next morning, what I did is I posted an Instagram story, as we do. This is the way millennials flirt, if you're looking. I posted an Instagram story of my AeroPress coffee maker, and I just pushed it down. Now, if you know anything about the AeroPress, it's cool. It looks cool. It's like, ooh, this is inviting. This is something fun. And I said, I'll just see if she's interested. I've given her an opportunity to reach out if she would like. 2 hours later, I have a response to that story that says, hey stranger, I don't know you, but what's this coffee magic you've got going on? You want to continue?
Yes, I took the baits. At the time, did I think it was on purpose? No, but I took the bait, messaged him. We ended up talking for a while, exchanged messages back and forth to a certain extent. We ended up having our first date on a Friday night at Vintage downtown on the east side. And now we're getting married on a Friday night at Vintage. So it's all very exciting. I guess if there was a moral to the story, and like we've talked about this a lot, but if there's a moral, I mean, like I came into this like simply listening to a podcast because I was curious, I wanted to learn, I wanted to educate myself, I wanted to sit at the table. And what I found that is when you lean into things, when you say yes, when you want to be part of the story, things will happen that you didn't expect, things that you couldn't have even hoped for or imagined. So now we're here getting married. Do you want to add more to that?
I'll just say as part of the story too, one of the things that Pastor G has shared in our Fountain of Life work, I'm also an associate pastor at his church, Fountain of Life, is that oftentimes the cross-cultural journey or journeys into different spaces takes you into places where the thing you think that you're entering into is not actually the only thing that you enter into, but your life, the wholeness of your life expands from there. I entered into Fountain of Life, I entered this setting in order to learn cross-cultural work, to learn how to pastor in a setting that looked different than mine. And that has been one of the greatest joys as I've gone through. Not always easy, but very great joy of continuing to learn. And how that journey has affected me in my mental health journey, how it's called out, I struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder, how it's called out the perfectionism because it calls out, as we've been calling out white supremacy, we understand how white men can sometimes be addicts to perfectionism and how that can be detrimental to our mindsets, and how I've learned and how I've grown. I've learned how to use a cast iron skillet in a way that has benefited me beyond what I could have ever dreamed. And in a way in which I'm so thankful that Pastor G, you introduced Haley and I so that we can get married on a Friday night in Vintage. I'm thankful for this opportunity, and I'm thankful that the Black Like Me podcast, as we celebrate tonight, the incredible #1 in Madison podcast, that I also get to celebrate that this is where I met my wife as well. So, thank you.
Let me get this straight. So white millennials use a black podcast to hook up. Black people can't have shit. Tyler here, that was great. Oh my goodness, we're gonna have stories to tell when we're old men. We're gonna have stories to tell. Tyler and Joel, can I ask you both back up? I'd like to interview these two gentlemen who are good friends and good guys. Some of my staff are like, I'm gonna tell you, cuss. Some of my folks have been threatening me back there. Their office key ain't gonna work tomorrow. Watch, they're gonna go to work. So listen, you all. So just a couple things. Tyler, I'm gonna start with you. You had a chance to see a lot of the podcast from the beginning. I mean, as we were thinking about it, wrestling with the name and how we're going to do this, you were very eager in helping to pull that together. Just curious if you just have any special insights about what you learned about being behind the scenes as we've tried to pull the podcast together, and if anything of note comes to mind.
I think one of the first things that often comes to mind, or I guess it's a lesson I've learned, is that there really is a conversation happening behind the scenes. There's really a conversation, a deeper conversation that often I want to share an example of some of the work that we've done as a result. Oftentimes when I would walk into spaces in Madison where racial justice conversations were happening, particularly when they're happening at a table set by white folks, or at a table set by a white-led organization or a white-run organization, is that we would talk about racial justice, but it was always the same folks who were there. There would be people who, from the white community, saw themselves as bridge builders, wanted to learn, wanted to grow, wanted to continue to really lean in, and they had a lot of eagerness. And there would also be a lot of folks of color who would come, but it would also often be people who were really intentionally working to be bridge builders. People who were really intentionally doing that, because a lot of, I've just learned, I've noticed, being in spaces that are often set by white agendas, set by white organizations, set in white spaces, they oftentimes take a toll that's so much that people just don't want to show up. And that's a good thing, to not feel like you have to show up in all these spaces that are always run by white-led spaces, white organizations, white places like that. But there's a conversation that's happening that these white folks who want to learn from, they need to go to. But instead of it being in a white-led space, they need to actually take the steps to join into, to go and to enter into spaces that might be uncomfortable for them, and to learn, and to actually hear what's going on, or what are the genuine, real concerns that are going on underneath, behind. I think so often we think that, okay, if you if we just create a space to talk about racial justice, particularly in a white community from a white-led organization inviting different people, I think that there's a different conversation happening. And so that's why I think the podcast matters so much, because it allows a space that is set by a Black individual having a conversation with Black individuals in spaces where genuine conversation can be had in a space that's not being determined or overseen by white folks. So.
I'm gonna go far. Do you remember when we walked into an office once, the two of us? I'm old enough to be Tyler's dad. I know I don't look it, but I'm old enough to be Tyler's dad. He walked into a place, and this gentleman, I believe it was a man, gentleman extended his hand to Tyler and said, "You must be Dr. G. Nice to meet you." You remember that?
If you think I look young now, I was 4 years younger at that point. And he extended his hand and said, "You must be Dr. G."
Now, do you think that's because he looks like his name should be G? So was it really what came after Alice, what came before Alice? Did he look more like a doctor than I do? Or more G than I do? That's...
Probably more G.
Yeah. Those are just interesting things, and those are lessons you can't buy, like to be there and hear those kinds of things. Or we were in a space once to have a show, and a woman, I think this only happens in Madison. I'm sure it happens other places, I'm being facetious, but only in Madison we pride ourselves in it. This woman wanted to show me that she was so liberal and so progressive that she could say the N-word to me because it didn't mean anything to her. And I said, "Don't say that to me anymore." No, that's what he called himself. He called himself blank blank Jim. So we kept going on, and I said, and so I couldn't get her to shut up and stop saying the word. So I had to walk in to record my podcast. And so I went into the studio and I said, "Hey Eli, hey Jeremy, hey Tyler, come from behind the glass. I need y'all in the studio. Why do white people want to say the N-word so bad? Like, well, you say it and we can just admit you want to say it and then deal with the ass whooping that comes behind it. But you can't just say that because you're liberal, but say it and then take what happens as a result." And so I had them tell me what's going on in white people's minds and they want to say this. That was kind of a very interesting podcast. I don't remember, does anybody remember the episode that? Just shut the hell up. Oh my gosh, but here's what's really interesting. When I turned to go into the studio to tell Jeremy and Eli what happened, I saw Tyler at the person's desk explaining stuff. I couldn't see what was going on, but I could see his body language and I could see theirs. And I remember thinking, that didn't make the situation go away, but it was so helpful to realize that I don't have to be called the name. And she wasn't calling it, but she was saying that she could say it, that I don't have to explain. Because what happened was she wanted to be absolved by me since she had insulted me. So she kept saying it to get me to say, it's okay to say it. I know you don't mean it when you say it, but dang, that comes off your lips so smoothly. Like you said, like you've been practicing in a mirror. And so she wanted me to somehow say, I know you don't mean it when you're saying it. But the fact that my friend, my colleague, and ally was out there explaining it helped me to realize that when I walked out of that space, I wouldn't get snagged again to continue the conversation. The conversation went like, what, 2 weeks? Like every time she would see me for the next, she would want to pull me in to explain what she meant. And so allyship is very, very interesting. It sort of goes into what Jeremy was saying a little bit earlier. You can choose, well, they don't really mean it. People are just saying, is it a soft fire? All this kind of stuff. But it was great to know that in addition to dealing with that, 8:30 in the morning on a Wednesday, that I didn't have to sit there and try to explain why that was so asinine. And so I appreciate the fact that I'm being surrounded by allies who know when and how to speak up so that it's not incumbent upon me or on us to tell people, you probably shouldn't say that or you probably shouldn't do that. And so those are just some examples of some cool spaces that we've been in together. Joel, you mentioned that you are training to become an absent-minded professor, and but you're using the podcast in your class. I'm going to get to that in just a moment, but when you were on the show, the two of you on the show, it was really interesting because I flipped the script a bit. So I asked Joel, would he please speak for all white men? Because I'm always asked to speak for black people, always. So Tell me about the black. How do black people feel? What's the black thought? What's the black feel? What's the black aesthetic? What's the black theology on this? So I put that pressure on him a little bit, which is kind of funny, sort of tongue in cheek. But we really did talk about critical race theory and how people were really freaking out over this whole concept. And so, Joel, I think the first question I want to ask you is, how has listening to the podcast helped you to engage in some of those tougher conversations that I know you may not be able to have with your dad or have around, policies, but in your classrooms or with your colleagues? How has listening to the podcast given you space and language to talk about some of these issues of race that we think are really passé now?
I think it's opened up a lot of doors for really good conversations with students. Because again, I think there's this culture of comfortability with the conversation, and that doesn't always translate into commitment. And I think one thing I really appreciate about your podcast is there's action. There's an invitation to be a part of something more. And so my students really latch on to donate, educate, affiliate. They really latch on to it. We have very good conversations about that. And it's really rewarding to see them synthesize that and then take that information and apply it to other social justice issues. I think I shared this with you before, but we had a unit, after our unit on racial justice, we had a unit on gender justice. And one of my students wrote a paper talking about how to use the model of educate, donate, affiliate with respect to undoing sexism and patriarchy. And I had never thought of that connection before, but it seems like it's a very obvious connection. So I think the podcast just creates an authority that I simply do not have. Another thing that you say, there's an episode that I assigned to my students that is really powerful. It's like 7 lessons for white people in this historic moment. And you say something in the episode like this. You say, as a black man, you expect me to identify with George Floyd, but you, as a white listener, don't think that you have to identify with Derek Chauvin. That blows my students' minds. So I think there's just a wealth of information and experience that your podcast provides for us to really learn and grow and be convicted by.
I'm noticing that in this country, we've missed a generation that really focuses on social justice because we've been led to believe that it was fixed with Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. So you have younger generations. You have people like Lauren and AJ and Samantha and Joel and Tyler and others who are working with us, but they perhaps did not have these conversations with their parents. And so you have a group of people who want to engage in social justice, but there weren't necessarily people who looked different than them around the dinner table. Parents didn't really talk about it. And so people thought that by not talking about it, they were being racially inclusive or racially sensitive. But by not talking about it, I think the generation, maybe mine or younger, particularly those who are white, just sort of said this is a non-issue, we're not even going to talk about it. And so you have a generation that's anti-bullying, that believes that everyone should be at the table. Many people think this, but they don't have real life examples of people who have really wrestled with these issues, who can say, this is what it takes, this is what it's going to cost you. And so my heart really goes out to the younger generations who really want to get this, but many times don't have a clue of what it looks like and what it feels like. And that's why Lean Into Allyship, and that's why the podcasts were created, so that they could have spaces to talk and learn and share, because that's important. And do you two think that that's a fair assessment, that you're wrestling with issues that maybe faith leaders or educational leaders or maybe even community leaders didn't really talk about with you? Do you think that's fair to say? I love the fact that your graduate students are listening to the podcast and that they're just getting a different perspective on these things. I could ask these gentlemen so many more questions, but I want to be respectful of time, and I know that there's a few more things that we want to do. So please help me thank Tyler and Joel. I hope they come back on the show sometime.
Okay, that was great. And I just want to comment, Tyler, I just thought of this while you were telling your story, but I don't know what they were putting in the water, Dr. G, at that studio, or what filter you're using when you edit Jeremy, but I remember that my wife was also like, when I hear your voice on that podcast. It's different. I like it. So, I don't know. It's doing something. Yeah. I just have some more statements that people said about the podcast. This is from listener Daniel Kim. I first had the privilege of meeting who I consider professor, mentor, friend, civil rights leader, Reverend Dr. Alex G. over a decade ago, and has been blessed enough to follow his work from afar in the New York City area. I've been able to meet him in person and through various media where he has had my heart burning within me, and the Black Like Me podcast has been no different. Black Like Me podcast is the no-holds-barred, tell the brutally honest truth, hardest hitting, gift and privilege of being able to audit an African-American history class at the HBCU week in, week out, with renowned historians, activists, professors, pastors, mentors, politicians, etc., as guests that I have learned from, gleaned deep insights from, and cried from, got angry with, as I fell deeper in love with my Black brothers and sisters, causing me to increase my efforts further into a journey of allyship on a personal level, having learned how systematic, deep-rooted, institutional, intentional, how Black history is American history. Furthermore, as a Korean American, my freedom and privileges that I bask in as an American would not have been possible without the many civil rights warriors that shed their blood, sweat, and tears for my luxuries. Unfortunately, I can't mention my favorite episode amongst a sea of incredible episodes. I love the episode with Lexi G because her insights on intersectionality were mind-blowing. Realizing that she is definitely her father's daughter. In the most recent season, the episode with Reverend John Edgerton was mind-blowing also. Overall, the introspective episodes where Dr. G shares his pains, anger, and insights were some of the most impactful. Thank you, Alex G and Black Like Me staff. And thank you for all your hard work. Great, yeah. So, we love hearing the impact of this. And I'm gonna bring Samantha back up.
Okay, all right, so Dan is unable to be here today. For those that know him, I am so honored to have been able to come alongside him and Dr. G and everyone at Nehemiah and Justified Anger and the Lean Into Allyship series that started about 2.5 years ago. It has been sincerely life-changing for both Dan and myself in so many forms, in so many ways. Dan and I worked together and had been colleagues and friends through work for a long time. And when he initially posted about this opportunity for a conversation with a gentleman named Dr. G, who up until that point I was not familiar with, I instantly messaged him and said, I'm not sure how I can be involved, but I want to be involved. How can I help? How can I support? I'm all in. And so, from there, Lean Into Allyship grew, was birthed and grew, and is flourishing now. Many of you today I know are on those sessions. I will say it is a very different ballgame being behind a screen on Zoom versus being here in public. I think listening to so many of the speakers tonight makes me, and I know Dan and I feel the same way, we often wonder if we are qualified and worthy to be the ones leading those conversations with such incredible thought leaders and just all around phenomenal humans in our community and beyond that we get to connect with through the series. So just acknowledging our humble gratitude for the opportunity to learn and unlearn and grow alongside you. But he shared, he has since moved to Milwaukee since we started the series. He now lives in Milwaukee and was unable to come tonight, but he did share some feedback and some sentiments that he was wanting us to make sure to read on his behalf. So, about the Black Like Me podcast. There are so many things to appreciate about the award-winning Black Like Me podcast. I took a little time to think about why it's one of my favorite podcasts. First, listening to Dr. G's reflection episodes really made me feel like we were talking one-on-one, and it causes a much deeper reflection for me of what I need to consider or improve in my allyship journey. The conversations are so rich where I get to hear so many different people sharing their lived experiences and expertise. This was especially impactful during the last 2 years when the pandemic made it much less safe to get proximate. I have to hear things from numerous people in different ways on the same topic to have it sink in. The Black icebreakers open my eyes every time to how strong and resilient the Black culture is. My brother and I were talking about a year ago, and we agreed that we don't lean into our culture and didn't even really know what our culture was. As an aside, I know that episode has been mentioned earlier in the night, but the one with, I think, Tyler and Eli, that was one of maybe the first ones that I listened to when I started engaging with the podcast. It is so powerful to understand and acknowledge the way that as white people we don't truly know and embrace and find joy and true identification in our culture. And I really remember that being really powerful, and Dan and I had talked about that one early on in the Lean Into Allyship journey that we took together, and just so many times that we've shared our reflections about podcast episodes. Lastly, the podcasts create a safe space to continually learn, hear candid feedback that may hurt, and gives me time to reflect on things at my own pace. I have shared numerous episodes with my inner circle, and it gives us time to process what we learned together. It has driven great conversations with my wife and in-laws regularly. As far as his experience with LIA, with Lean Into Allyship. Helping to lead the Lean Into Allyship series has been an incredible learning experience for me alongside my allyship journey. I took some time to reflect on what has been the most impactful and what stands out that I have learned. First, in looking back, this was only meant to be a one-time event and now has turned into a monthly series for 2.5 years. The key that this taught me is to get started and take action from a single idea instead of trying to build out this perfect plan of how I would get involved. I had sat for 2 years after taking the Black History course and did nothing because I was looking for someone to tell me what to do. Now I know I need to simply take action, make mistakes, and get better each day, and the opportunities have always followed. I have seen firsthand how people show up when traumatic events happen within the Black community, but how quickly those conversations and the focus is dramatically reduced days and weeks later. While I knew this happened, it gave me a new perspective on the concept of a movement or a moment. In addition, I've learned the importance of striking the balance between following Black leadership without putting the burden on those Black leaders. Also, in retrospect, I realized that affiliating was the hardest thing for me. I could have donations taken directly out of my paycheck and read books and listen to podcasts in my space of comfort, but developing relationships with people on topics that made me uncomfortable was one of the most critical steps. These relationships allowed trust to develop and have open conversations about hard topics with both white would-be allies and individuals in the Black community. Lastly, getting involved in this series has opened up so many conversations with people, both in my close and extended network, that I had never talked to about racial equity. So talking with Dan earlier today, I know he sincerely wishes that he would be here, and he, just sends his gratitude and appreciation. To that, I would like to say ditto and take my seat. My daughter is 11, and she has informed me that ditto is not cool, and we do not say that anymore. But I would like to say that. But I'm not going to do that because the team with Nehemiah had asked if I would be interested and willing to say something, and I will forevermore live to serve and support and show up for and carry through the work of Nehemiah and everyone on the team. So I have a couple of things that I want to talk about. I think the biggest thing is really just recognizing that imposter syndrome, right, that leads to inaction, and being a part of a couple of the planning conversations, in the development of this event, and trying to pull together and identify speakers and individuals who would be willing to share their story. And Dan and my name both came up, and we had both acknowledged that could we just not? Could we maybe just have a cocktail and sit in the back and know that we are, supportive and all in, but just the vulnerability of, my heart is all in, but my head, that imposter syndrome really creeps in, right? And you're not sure what qualification and, justification you have to be the one up on the stage saying the things. So I think that is such a direct, tie and correlation to allyship in and of itself, right? It is just about starting where you are, wherever that is. It is the right time, you are enough, you are necessary. It is not only your opportunity, it is your responsibility and your obligation, and it is about just starting where you are and continuing, to move forward from there in every way that you can. My uncle passed away over the Thanksgiving holiday, and we spent some time working through that in the last week. He and my dad had been estranged for quite a while after the passing of my grandmother, and spending this last week watching my dad's, heartache and guilt and the weight that he has carried in not having made amends that he in his heart intended to, but his head got in the way and he didn't do that. I think that coming here tonight is such a blessing and an opportunity to, come home to, another version of home for me, in a place where you know that you are supported and loved, and welcome to come as you are. I'm grateful for that, and it is a really good reminder that you don't wait for, the easiest opportunity. You don't wait for, when the moment is handed to you, you make the moment, you make it happen because we have just this one chance. I think at the end of the day, we are all just here to walk each other home, right? And every opportunity that we have to do that alongside one another and make someone's journey beautiful and fulfilled and safe and dignified and loved is a beautiful thing. And the Nehemiah group and Lean Into Allyship and the relationships and community with you all in this room have given me a personal opportunity to do that. And I'm so grateful, and I, not stopping now. So thank you for giving me that quick opportunity. Thank you all for being here tonight. By being here, we are both educating and affiliating, right? So we've covered 1 and 3, and the takeaway is to make sure that you wrap up the evening with number 2, whether it's through Patreon or many of those other, donation opportunities. But thank you so much for being here. Congratulations, Dr. G. Your Black Like Me podcast is so deserving of the recognition. Thank you all for the opportunity.
What a powerful mic drop. Wow. Hey, listen, you all, thank you for just hanging with us. We're almost at the end of our program. We have one more storyteller, and then I have a few questions for them after we finish. But this is just going to be a powerful story as well. I'm going to introduce you to Siobhan Jackson, one of the newest staff members of my team. Siobhan is Nehemiah's Director of Mobilization, and she's going to come and talk to you the story as well. When she's finished, Aaron's going to join us. I have just a few questions for them, and then we'll have our music team take us on out. So Siobhan, come on up.
Woo! I am much taller than everybody here. Thank you all so much for coming, and Eli and Dr. G, thank you all for having me and letting me speak. I'll try to be quick because I know it's a little bit late. But honestly, the beauty of me being here comes yet again from Dr. G's speaking. I can't say I've had too much time to listen to the Black Like Me podcast or any extra time to experience Nehemiah because I'm not from Madison. But when I got here, and while I was working at American Family Insurance, I had the pleasure of being able to hear him speak while I was there. And I think the sort of the theme of where I've gone from hearing him speak for the first time and then applying for Nehemiah once and not getting the job, and then applying again and finally getting that seat at the table. Dr. G is not just a storyteller, not just a visionary, but he inspires people to tell their stories and tell stories and be vulnerable. One of the most amazing things about being a part of the Nehemiah staff has been finally being in a space that feels comfortable and it feels like home again. I've been so far from my family for so long, and then on that first day working for Nehemiah, getting on this Zoom call, our weekly Monday morning Zoom call, I believe Dr. G was there, which apparently was a rare occurrence, so I felt very very honored. We were in this space where it was all about being vulnerable with each other and sharing our Black experience, sharing our ally experience. And that has been the theme of my work this entire time. I work as the director of mobilization, and what that means is I work primarily with volunteers and people who engage with Nehemiah and engage with the Justified Anger programming. And as we've heard from most people here, so many people have gone well above and beyond that. So I wanted to talk about one of those people actually, and slightly give a sly plug to other things that allies have done to expand their work. So one of the things that one of the programs that I have the pleasure of supporting is a monthly sort of group that gets together. It's called White and Wondering. And I know it's an interesting name, but it really does indicate what's really going on here. And it's led by a volunteer who came to Nehemiah through the Justified Anger programming, through hearing Dr. G speak. And her name is Paula Wick. She's sitting right over there. Wave, Paula. Paula began, along with another volunteer, this group in which they monthly meet and intentionally be vulnerable about what it feels like to go through their allyship journey. I'm sure you're probably thinking in the back of your head, okay, is this just a group to talk about white fragility and things like that? But as I got to sit in that space and experience what Nehemiah's work and Justified Anger's work was doing for these people, they were intentionally being vulnerable about how hard it was and how much they were not going to stop being good allies. Paula always begins with a grounding exercise by Erasmus Medicum, and spends time with each of the participants to give them opportunity just to let go of what they're feeling, so that they can keep working on being good allies. And during that time, I've gotten to work with her so much, and I've learned what it means to work with an ally that is in a slightly different space than I am. I'm the director of mobilization. I work with all of these volunteers. It's my job to bring the volunteers and people who want to donate to Nehemiah. But it's Paula's job that she just took on by herself to sit in that space where people are being vulnerable all the time. And getting to talk to her about what that space means and how that space can grow and be an actual point of education for people. We got to talk so much. I remember not too long ago, we actually had a conversation about what should we talk about next, and she was bringing up trying to deal with what it means when you come across a person that you don't think you're ever going to reach. And I remember the first thing I thought was, well, that's just not what we do here. And I really don't think White and Wondering should be a place where we're just going to say, oh, okay, well, we're not going to really make it. That's not the point at all. So we had a conversation about, okay, let's talk about a way to change that phrasing. Let's rephrase it. Let's move to a different place. And it gave me an opportunity to talk about bridge work. And because I love how much that Dr. G, and then through Nehemiah, and then through myself, and now through Paula Wick, we are all these bridges. We're bringing people from where they are to where they should be. There's no one we can't reach through this work, and it's been an absolute pleasure to actually work with Paula and see how she received. Okay, yeah, I get that. Being a bridge is this important thing. Sometimes you are in a place that isn't where I am or Dr. G is, but there's somebody near you that needs to come across the same space that you are. You are a bridge to that place, and I thank Paula every week, every month for letting me be in that space. It's also an interesting space because obviously it's all white people, and I enter that space every month to say hello as a supporter, staff supporter of this group, and it's not very often I get to speak, which is I think is intended, but sometimes I do get to speak and I do get to do a little bit of that bridge work, and I'm just incredibly grateful to be working with Nehemiah and have the great pleasure of knowing what it means to tell a story and be vulnerable in those spaces, because that vulnerability helps that bridge work happen. Yeah, and that's my story.
Don't go nowhere now.
You come somewhere.
Okay.
Hey, to join us, I'm also inviting up Aaron Hicks, who is our entry coordinator at Nehemiah. Now, Siobhan and Aaron, we talk about how when crises happen and when crap hits the fan, people show up, they want to be connected, they want to get involved, they want to donate, but the further we move away from those issues, sometimes people become less committed. And so, in light of how that swing happens, where do you have hope that people are going to continue leaning in and experiencing change in allyship?
I think I just talked about it.
Okay. Well, I think hope is created when people see opportunities, and I think people start to see opportunities, specifically in Nehemiah's. I mean, there's so many different opportunities, so many ways in which you can get involved. And it continues to open new doors and close old ones. Just me standing here in itself is a success story, right? And it's based on you guys, right? It's based on all the investment that you put in to Nehemiah, to the work that we do, and ultimately how we deliver it to the community. So I think we continue to create this hope based on seeing success.
That's good. That's good. Part of what makes Nehemiah so strong, in my opinion, Aaron, is that we have staff with lived experience. People who don't just have the theoretical knowledge and information to go about this work, but people who have lived experience, who aren't afraid to say where they're from, where they've lived, what they've done. And so what motivates you to continue to be vulnerable and talk about aspects of your story as we bring more allies in? Aaron, what helps you to continue telling your story so openly?
I think the biggest thing is when you come from incarceration, you feel like the least. And I think being a part of Nehemiah has made me feel like a person, right? And I think that's what we do with all individuals that come through Nehemiah. Wherever you may fall short, whatever it is, I think they still receive you and accept you as a person, and build from right there, right? And the whole leadership piece, I mean, it's an add-on, but just to know that you got individuals in our community that still just receive you as a human being, that's huge. And so I do it because I see other people in myself. And so when I find me in other people, then I feel like it's my obligation to give something that I felt like I didn't have.
Siobhan, you have the very interesting task of helping to welcome in allies, to train allies as a mobilization director. And the subject of race is creeping up in culture. I mean, we have in movies, we have Woman King with Viola Davis, we have Black Panther 2, we have the Jordan Peele movies, and a lot of them have very interesting messages about race relations. They're not so hidden. We see it, oh, I get that. I know what that's about. I know what they mean when they stir in that cup and saying, get out. I get it. But do you think our non-Black allies are understanding these messages that are really speaking to the racial division that's happening in our world? The messages are everywhere. It used to be dog whistle, but it's so out in the open. People are saying what they used to think. But as you're working with allies and training them, are you finding that the folks that are coming to us are aware of these messages that are addressing issues of racial justice, or do you think it's still hard for people to believe that this is really an issue for our time?
That's a hard question. Yes, I mean, so many allies that come to us, especially, I've got to talk about what I'm wondering, because there's a gentleman by the name of Phil Saunders who comes to that group, who does everything he can to observe these stories and listen to these stories and watch these movies and be engaged with it. And I can hear where he has picked up on the more blatant ways that we're trying to say this is what's happening and this is how we're thinking, this is how we're feeling in these times. But there's always that little bit of misunderstanding. You know, I haven't come across too many allies that I get to talk about pop culture and how we can address race and things like that. But I can say just from how I know people that I've spoken to out of context have received things like Wakanda Forever, but they'll say, okay, I'm not sure I understand fully what's going on here. I see two oppressed people fighting each other, and I thought that's what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm like, well, let's talk about it, because it's two oppressed people that are arguing over how do we fight back against our oppression.
Right.
And that's something that is even harder for people, for allies especially, and for people who are not even coming to this work to understand. And I do hope that more and more stories bring up more and more of these types of contexts, so that as people come to Nehemiah, I can say, all right, I hope you're at this level, because we're going to jump to another level of understanding.
Let's do it. Let's do it. My staff they really make me look good.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's right. Hello, HR department. Siri, take a memo. No.
That's true tonight.
Payroll is getting less and less every half hour or so.
We still donate.
That's right. That's right. All right, you stay on. You just earned that job. Listen, please help me thank Siobhan Jackson. Listen, you all, thank you so much for being here, for being so patient and hanging with us. The work of Nehemiah, of leaning into allyship with the podcast, are very unique, because there are many social service organizations that serve African American people, and we need that. But we have this unique thing where we are also bringing in allies to understand the work and to join us in the work, whether it's court observers or whether it's White and Wandering or people who come to the lunch and learns. We have this ability, this appetite to bring in allies to understand the work and to join us in the work, not just watch us do the work, but help us do the work. But then we're also creating curriculum, we're creating papers, and we're becoming thought leaders in how people hire and how people promote and how people think about these issues. And so we grew from a fledgling organization that served at-risk African-American children to organizations that are helping to save at-risk organizations, multinational organizations, who thought they knew a lot about DEI issues and how to really reach out to the community. But we've been able to do this for the past 30 years from Nehemiah's perspective. The Justified Anger work is only about 10 years old, and then the podcast is about 4 years old. But for 3 decades, we've been able to do this work because people in this community have believed in us, have shown up, have supported us, have volunteered, who have given their dollars, and who've helped their organizations to give. And so we feel that we are a gift to the community, but you as our supporters have been a gift to us. And so I really want to thank you for sharing this evening with us. I usually travel around the country speaking within organizations like this or spaces like this. It really is an honor to be in my own hometown, where I was raised, where I grew up, where I'm raising my family, and to be able to gather people and to talk about the exciting things of my work. And so this is really meaningful to me. During one of the breaks, someone walked up and gave me a recommendation for a new nursing home for my mom. That is allyship. That is allyship. And so, another step is if you would call this place and tell them that my mom was on her way, that we're going to be working on that. But I mean, that's community. You state something, and someone slides you a note and say, hey, here's a good place. I think they've got opening. You may want to call them. So what a beautiful example of what can happen when we come together. And you may not fully understand my journey. I may not fully understand your journey. But I think the important thing is that we all be on the journey together. That I don't expect you to understand me fully, and I don't have the energy to understand you fully. But I've been raised around you, so I know a lot more about you than you know about me. Because you learned about me on television and BET, and I learned about you in life. But the thing that holds us together is that we're on the journey together. So if you follow the podcast, find out about Lean Into Allyship. If you're a part of Lean Into Allyship, learn about the podcast and learn about the U.S. Black History course for a new day. Cross-pollinate so that you can continue to expand yourselves and for your learning. I want to thank Cafe Coda for hosting us again. For our wonderful bartender who's just patient, pouring up the drinks and listening. To all the technical folks who are here, and to my trusted colleague Eli, standing you up to put this together with a team of folks. We are so grateful that you all are here. And so I don't think they're closing. You can still get something to snack on or drink before you leave. Mitch and Joey, I believe, are going to be just playing us out a little bit, just giving us a little background music as we mingle and as we leave. And please take some of these cozies home with me. They've been in my trunk for so long, and I brought them just for you all tonight. Put them in someone's stocking stuffer. Take them to work. Think about the person who needs the most racial reconciliation in their lives, perhaps the most racist person you know, and give them a Black is Beautiful cozy. Okay, that's sweet, it's warm, and it's also great revenge. And if they re-gift it, we still win, all right? All right, thank you all. Have a good night.